So thank you so much, Jill. And let me just start by congratulating Joe and the rest of the team at the Toronto Global Forum. Joe, I was just listening to your comments on the challenges we all face today, including, of course, the International Economic Forum of the Americas series and the very important Toronto Global Economic Forum. So as a partner on behalf of the Ontario government, we appreciate the approach. We appreciate the innovation, and of course, I appreciate the opportunity today to speak with the delegates about what we will be seeing, what we have seen in the province of Ontario and in Canada, and what we will be talking about and going through together in the weeks and months ahead. I'd also just should mention that a number of my colleagues, I think Minister Mulrooney, our Minister of Transportation, was participating today. We also have my colleagues, Minister Fidelity, Minister Yakubuski, and Minister Bethenthalvey, all of whom are going to be joining various sessions. So the Ontario government is a very active partner, and that's because we see the value of this dialogue, both in terms of us getting an opportunity to speak to the broader business and economic community, but also because we want to hear about a number of the topics. And your topic of forging a resilient economy couldn't come at a better time. I'll be making an announcement literally within the hour, along with Premier Ford, about our next budget, the budget of the province of Ontario, and the date of that budget. Some of you will recall, who watch Ontario closely, that back in March, Ontario was first among the Canadian jurisdictions in terms of presenting a one-year financial outlook. At that time, we didn't believe that we were in a situation where we could present a multi-year budget. This was on March 25th, just days after the state of emergency was declared and the World Health Organization declared a global pandemic. But continuing with our approach, which is to be transparent and clear about our financial plan, we have plans later and early next month to announce our first multi-year budget. Again, this will be taking a leadership role in the Canadian context in terms of projecting out over a series of years what we expect to see as a province, both in terms of the costs of COVID-19 and of government in general, and the revenue expectations and what we expect from the economy. We think this is important and showing leadership for two reasons. First, there are many, many partners of the Ontario government, whether that's our colleges and universities, whether that's our hospitals and their frontline staff who've done such a fabulous job as our frontline heroes during this pandemic, or whether that's municipalities or the thousands and thousands of other organizations that we work with across the province. It's important for them to have clarity and be able to set their expectations about what the government of Ontario will be doing so that they can make plans to support people across the province. It's also important because citizens need to understand where the government is going, how we plan to spend the taxpayers' dollars that are particularly cherished at a time like this, how we plan to continue to invest and make sure that we provide the supports that are required protect the health and well-being, not just of Ontarians, but also of communities and our jobs. So we will be making that presentation early next month in terms of the budget. And that budget will really build on the solid foundation that started back on March 25th, which, I suppose wasn't that long ago, but seems like a lifetime ago, when we laid out our plan to respond to COVID. We've updated that plan over time, but it currently represents $30 billion of commitments, $30 billion of supports for jobs, for communities, for healthcare, for individuals, very much responding to the needs of Ontario and making sure that we maintain the flexibility to respond to needs as they evolve. It also represents a very, very strong working partnership with our federal colleagues and with the municipal governments. And I'd like to speak about both of those briefly. We've been working closely with the federal government since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic to make sure that we're providing a broad range of supports. And the federal government has provided those in a number of areas, direct to individuals, direct to organizations, direct to businesses, as has the Ontario government. But I think we forged a closer working relationship, and I think I can speak not just for the province of Ontario, but for my other colleagues who are finance ministers in other provinces, We have regular biweekly conversations with the Minister of Finance and Deputy Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland. And previous to that, we had regular conversations with the previous Minister of Finance, Bill Morneau, trying to make sure that as provincial and federal governments, we're aligning our priorities. We are not working at odds or even duplicating the work that each level of government is trying to do. We continue to look forward to having a constructive dialogue and working partnership with the federal government. We look forward to continuing to talk to them about a number of important issues, whether it's fiscal stabilization or the expansion of the federal government's what was a significant historic partnership in terms of the Canada Health Transfer, but which has been reducing over time and is a risk of becoming below the level it needs to be effective. But we'll continue to have those conversations, both about what we need to do in the future and what we need to do right now to make sure that we're supporting people in Ontario and, of course, people across Canada. Similarly, we negotiated a historic partnership with the federal government that included support for municipalities, both in the areas of transit and in the areas of support around municipal governments. Premier Ford was a true leader amongst his colleague premiers at working with Prime Minister Trudeau and the Deputy Prime Minister to make sure that we had up to $4 billion of support, $2 billion for municipal issues and supports, and $2 billion to support transit systems specifically, which are so vital to the reopening. So this Safe Restart program provided support across a range of areas, but again was a very important part of our partnership with local governments. We've been providing significant support at the local level for areas like our community service grants, which was over $500 million of additional support, right through to enabling them to provide deferrals of property taxes valued at $1.8 billion to support businesses and also residential taxpayers. And we'll continue to work with municipalities, both large and small. There are 444 municipalities across Ontario. All of them play a very important role in terms of providing services. So whether it's the federal government, the provincial government, or the municipal government, part of the key role that politicians are expected to play, and I think that citizens and taxpayers should expect us to play, is working together to make sure that through our various roles and through the various mechanisms that we have, we're providing support to communities, we're providing support for jobs, and we're providing support for individuals. Of course, one of the areas that we are watching closely as well is the economy. And we have seen, I think, and there was a very informative report from TD Bank that I'm sure a number of you watching, but called The Tale of Two Recoveries, just from last week, that talked about and compared the relative response and recoveries that we're seeing both north and south of the Canadian border. Looking more broadly, we've been seeing that there have been a range of responses across the globe in terms of the health response to COVID-19, and then the necessary supports that have been put in place, and the economic response from different levels of government at the federal and the subnational level. Interesting in that report was a fairly close comparison of the relative benefits of the approach in the United States and the, some would say, more cautious approach when it came to the health issue here in Canada. And I recommend it to those of you who haven't reviewed it, because what it demonstrated is that on the numbers, and they look at a variety of metrics, but in particular in terms of return of employment, which of course is a critical metric, but return of employment, the approach we've taken in Ontario, the approach we've taken in Canada, which again has been methodical, has focused particularly on the health issues related to COVID-19 and making sure that workplaces are safe so that employees and customers can return to work. That thus far, according to their judgment, that has proven a better approach. This is important because, as I've said a number of times, we are in the most difficult economic circumstances, certainly in my lifetime. And no two recessions are the same. But the one thing that we can look at is that there are a variety of experiences when it comes to previous recessions. In the case of Ontario, if you look at the last three recessions, In the most, the least difficult, it took approximately 22 months to return to employment levels pre-recession. And in the case of the most difficult one in the early 90s, it took over 80 months to return to the employment levels that we saw in the previous to that recession. So what we're signaling is that we need to be prepared. We need to understand the difference between this recession and others, particularly in terms of the underlying cause, which is a global health crisis, a global pandemic, which clearly has impacts in Ontario, but also has broader impacts in terms of important trading partners and in terms of the global economy. But it also means that we need to make sure that the solutions that all levels of government are putting forward are sensitive to the unique situation that we're finding in this particular recession and as a result of this global healthcare crisis. So in our planning, going back over the last 8 months since we rolled out our first response to COVID-19, we have made sure that we have that balance, that we have a balance between important programs that are fundamentally focused on protecting the health of Ontarians, investing in our public health care system, over $270 million in additional public health and community health support infrastructure, our hospital system in terms of reinforcing the core infrastructure, but also adding capacity, particularly in terms of intensive and acute care beds, making sure that we provided additional supports for some of our most vulnerable, over $500 million of support, particularly targeted at our long-term care sector, and making sure that we're also investing in making sure that we have the resources to make sure workplaces are safe. So a program that will create over 500 workplace safety inspectors, more workplace safety inspectors than we've ever had in the province of Ontario. But again, a vital link in that program to protect Ontario businesses and protect Ontario citizens. We've also had a number of programs to support individuals, going back to a program that provided $200 for every student or every child, $250 for special needs children. Support with regards to electricity pricing, again, very vital. Doubling something called the Gains benefit, which helped our 196,000 most vulnerable seniors with a doubling of that benefit. Removing interest charges and removing other late payment charges when it came to things like OSAP and property tax, workers' compensation charges, and other government taxes. So a number of areas of direct support for communities and individuals. We've also focused on what we need to do to make sure that our communities are in a place to recover. So one thing that I know Minister Fedeli is very proud of, and as a government we're very proud of, is the extent to which Ontario businesses and industries pivoted from their current production to make sure that they were producing vital PPE. And in that, we supported that through something called the Ontario Together Fund, through our work to make sure that we'll be manufacturing vital protective equipment here in Ontario, whether that's face shields or respirator masks or gloves or gowns. Much of this production now is possible here in Ontario, and we've secured our supply chains to make sure that as we go forward, we'll be able to provide the necessary PPE for our healthcare sector, for our long-term care sector, and also, as is required, for businesses as they take on the mandate to make sure that they protect their customers. So all of those features have been part of our plan to respond to COVID-19, $30 billion worth of supports. The budget that I'll deliver next month will build on that plan, will speak to the very important need to continue to provide the resources in our healthcare sector, continue to provide the protections and for the evolution of our long-term care sector, continue to make sure that we're providing support, whether it's for communities or for businesses that are operating in those communities. Most recently, that was through our commitment of $300 million to make sure that in the areas that are affected by a revised stage 2 public health order, we're able to partner with the federal government, who have committed to direct to tenant rent supports, in addition to an expansion of their loan program for businesses and their wage subsidy program, that the Ontario government will be there for those businesses that are affected by these revised public health standards when it comes to their property tax and their energy costs, to make sure that we do what we can do to support those businesses. $60 million to support PPE for small businesses, understanding that that's an additional burden on those small businesses. and $57 million in partnership with the federal government for our Digital Main Street program, where we're providing the tools that businesses need to move from a Main Street facing business to a Main Street and a digitally facing business. So our budget that will be presented in November will speak to all of those items, and it will continue to reflect our driving commitment, which is that we're going to make sure we're protecting the health and safety of Ontarians, and that we are making sure that we're protecting our communities, our businesses, and starting to chart our path to recovery. There's a story I like to tell when I do get these opportunities to speak to people like yourselves. And I always start it by saying that although I don't know all of you, I do know many of you. And I know that the individuals who participate in these kinds of forums are inevitably not just leaders in business, but leaders in your community. So I want to start by thanking you, not just for the leadership you're showing through the work you're doing through groups like the Toronto Global Forum and staying in touch and working with your business role, but also the role that you play in the community. We have something that the Premier likes to call the Ontario spirit, and it's something that has really come to the fore in this time, where we've seen people respond. And I've had, as you'd imagine, many conversations with small business leaders, with our bank CEOs, with leaders across business and industry, with our municipal leaders, with our healthcare leaders, with our education leaders. And I have to tell you, one of the very wonderful things about those conversations, that almost inevitably, at the start of that conversation, what those individuals say is, how can we help you? And I think that spirit, that Ontario spirit of how we can help, is quite vital. Now, the story I tell is about, it's a book that I read, this is pre-pandemic, probably 10 years ago, but it was a book about one of the other great pandemics, the Spanish flu, which of course happened over 100 years ago. And this was a particular history, and it happened to focus on the United States, and there's various numbers, but whether there were 600,000 deaths or over 1 million deaths, but many tragic deaths at that time. And what the historian noted, and what I recall from that reading of his history, was that immediately following the Spanish flu, immediately following those tragic deaths, there was a period in his research of about 10 years where he looked to but couldn't find much reference to, much discussion about the realities of what had gone on in the United States during that very difficult time of the Spanish flu. And his conclusion as to why that was the case was that collectively, people weren't very proud of how they'd responded to that. They weren't very, they had not wanted to talk about it. It's obviously a tragic time because of the deaths, but it was also a difficult time because, in his analysis, the way that individuals, communities, businesses, and civil society in general had responded to the Spanish flu hadn't been something that people were very proud of. So I tell that story, and of course I'm just quoting one person's version of the history, to say and remind us all that we are living in history now, probably the most relevant history that many of us will experience in our lifetime. And I urge all of you, through your various roles in business, in your communities, to be mindful of the fact that we want to be proud of the way that we've responded. I'm very proud of how Ontarians have responded. I'm very proud of that Ontario spirit, and I think we've certainly seen it similarly across the country and elsewhere. And I just encourage all of us to do that extra bit, make sure that we're always asking, how can we help when you have the opportunity to talk to individuals in your networks and beyond. We are going through a difficult time, but we've been through difficult times before, and we're going to go through better times in the future. So again, Jill, thank you for the opportunity today. I wish all of you the best in terms of the conference. I ask you all to stay safe and healthy, and I'll look forward to next year's forum, where I hope that we'll be able to see each other in person. Thank you very much.